Alien bullies destroyed a small alien girl's toy. One human made them regret Zira was only a small child, but her bright eyes sparkled with intelligence beyond her years. A native of the peaceful planet of Dareth, she was unlike many other species she encountered in the bustling intergalactic marketplace of Krylon Station. Despite the chaos and diverse array of alien species around her, Zira seemed unaware of the surrounding crowd, so engrossed was she in her tiny toy. The toy, a small, delicate creature made from shiny blue crystals, was her most treasured possession. It had been a gift from her mother before she passed away, and it was the only reminder Zira had left of her family. She would play with it endlessly, often imagining that it could come to life and protect her from the strange and sometimes intimidating beings that roamed the station. Krylon Station was a hub of activity. Aliens from hundreds of different planets, speaking in dozens of languages, gathered here to trade, sell, and share information. The air buzzed with commerce, laughter, and the occasional shout of an argument. Zira, however, remained in her little corner, far from the ruckus of the adults. She had always preferred to keep to herself, her heart too gentle to handle the harshness of the world outside her small bubble. Her delicate hands traced the crystal contours of the toy, imagining it could do more than just sit in her palm. The small, shimmering creature would spring into action and fight off anyone who tried to hurt her. It was her imaginary friend, her protector. But today, Zira was unaware that trouble was brewing. A group of 4 alien bullies, a gang of rough-looking creatures from the planet Zokran, walked by her little corner. The Zokrans were known for their tall, hulking frames, rough voices, and aggressive nature. Their species was feared across the galaxy, and they used their strength to intimidate anyone weaker than themselves. They had been eyeing Zira for some time now, mostly because she was small, frail, and unprotected in this vast, unfriendly place. To them, she was an easy target. The leader of the group, a massive alien named Kruk, sneered at Zira as they passed by. He was known for his cruelty. His skin was thick and leathery, and his eyes glowed a menacing red. The other 3 followed behind, grinning as they watched Kruk decide whether or not to cause trouble. Zira, oblivious to their intentions, was still lost in the world of her toy. She didn't notice Kruk's eyes narrowing as he came to a stop in front of her. "What's this?" Kruk's voice was gruff, filled with mocking amusement. Zira's head snapped up. She blinked, looking up at the towering alien. His shadow loomed over her, casting a dark spot on the ground where she sat. For a moment she froze, unsure of what to do. The voices around her had become distant, and her heart began to beat faster. She had been alone for so long that this close encounter with strangers made her uneasy. "That's mine," she said softly, her voice a mere whisper. The words hung in the air, but Kruk laughed, a deep, throaty sound. "Yours," he scoffed. "What kind of toy is this?" He snatched it out of her hands before she could react. Zira gasped. She reached for it, but Kruk held it just out of her grasp. The other bullies laughed, egging him on. They had seen her earlier, sitting quietly and playing with her precious toy, and now it seemed like the perfect moment to have some fun at her expense. "Come on, little girl," Kruk taunted, dangling the toy in front of her. "Why don't you play with something else? This toy's too fragile for someone like you." He squeezed it in his large, muscular hand, and Zira's eyes widened with fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, "give it back. It was a gift from my mother." The mention of her mother seemed to amuse Kruk even more. "Your mother," he sneered. "Do you think that makes you special? You're nothing here, little one." Before Zira could respond, Kruk made a show of crushing the toy in his hand. The sound of the crystals breaking echoed through the marketplace, a sharp, cruel noise that sent a wave of pain through Zira's chest. Her heart sank, and her eyes welled up with tears. The toy was now a broken mess of jagged shards and shattered pieces. It was more than just a toy, it was a piece of her past, something that connected her to her lost family. "Now you have nothing," Kruk said with a grin, "just like you're nothing." He tossed the toy aside carelessly, as though it was no more than a piece of garbage. The shards scattered across the ground, sparkling in the light. Zira stared at the wreckage of her toy, feeling a deep sense of loss. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she could hardly breathe. The market noise faded into the background as she sank to her knees, her fingers trembling as they reached out toward the shattered pieces. The laughter of the Zokrans echoed in her ears, each chuckle a cruel reminder that she was alone in a universe full of beings that would never understand her pain. At that moment, something shifted in the air. Zira felt a strange warmth, a sense of comfort that she couldn't quite explain. But it wasn't the warmth of the sun or the presence of someone she knew. It was something different, something powerful. As she stared at the broken pieces of her toy, she didn't notice the tall figure standing behind her at first. The crowd in the marketplace had slowly begun to take notice of what had happened. Some whispered among themselves, others turned their eyes away, unwilling to intervene. The Zokrins were a well-known menace, and no one wanted to get involved. But one person did. Captain Adrian Hayes, a human from Earth, was walking through the market on his way to a meeting with a local merchant. He was a seasoned soldier, a veteran of countless skirmishes across the galaxy, and he had seen his fair share of violence. But something about this particular scene caught his attention. The way the small girl was kneeling on the ground, the way the bullies stood over her with smug expressions. It reminded him of something from his past, something he'd long buried. Adrian had always been a protector. He had spent years defending the innocent, fighting for the downtrodden, and he couldn't stand by and watch this. Without thinking, he moved toward the group of Zokrins, his steps purposeful and firm. "Hey!" he called out, his voice carrying over the noise of the market. "What do you think you're doing?" The Zokrins turned, startled by the sudden appearance of the human. For a moment there was confusion in their eyes, as if they couldn't quite comprehend that a human was daring to challenge them. Kruk, the leader, scoffed. "What do you want, human? This is none of your business." Adrian's eyes narrowed. He was used to being underestimated. The Zokrins might have thought he was just another weakling, but they were wrong. He had survived battles in the most dangerous corners of the galaxy, and he had done so by being smarter, faster, and more relentless than his enemies. "It is now," Adrian replied, stepping closer. "You'll leave her alone or you'll regret it." The bullies laughed, but Adrian didn't flinch. His eyes were cold, and there was no mistaking the seriousness in his voice. He didn't need to make threats. He didn't need to raise his fists. His presence alone was enough to send a chill through the group. They might have been bigger, stronger, and more vicious, but they had no idea what kind of human they were dealing with. And as Zira looked up through the blur of tears in her eyes, she saw something in Adrian's gaze, something warm, something protective. She didn't know who he was, but in that moment she knew she was no longer alone. Adrian stood firm, his boots making soft echoes against the metal floor of the marketplace. The Zokrins, all towering over him, seemed unsure of how to react at first. Most beings in the galaxy knew better than to stand up to the Zokrins. Their strength, their size, and their aggressive nature were the stuff of legends. But Adrian wasn't like most beings. He had faced down terrifying enemies before, and he had never backed down from a fight. Not when it was for something, or someone, that mattered. Kruk, the leader, sneered down at Adrian, his massive hands curled into fists. "You're making a mistake, human," he growled. "This doesn't concern you. You're just a little flea in the way. You should walk away." Adrian's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "You're the ones making the mistake," he replied, his voice calm but filled with an unshakable resolve. "You'll stop tormenting her now, or you'll regret it." The bullies around Kruk laughed, their voices deep and menacing. They looked down at the human, their amusement growing by the second. The human was clearly outnumbered, and in their eyes, he was a mere speck compared to their massive frames. But they underestimated one thing, Adrian's unrelenting spirit. One of the Zokrins, a smaller but still imposing figure, took a step forward. His thick arms rippled as he cracked his knuckles. "You talk too much. Maybe we should teach you some manners." Adrian didn't flinch. He was already measuring their movements, calculating how to disable them one by one. He had been in situations like this before, outnumbered, surrounded with only his wits and skills to get him through. He knew he wasn't going to win through brute force alone, but that wasn't what mattered. It was about control. It was about turning their arrogance against them. Before the Zokrin could make a move, Adrian acted. His body was a blur of motion as he shifted his weight to the side and ducked, narrowly avoiding the outstretched arm of the Zokrin who had tried to strike him. The alien's momentum carried him forward, and in that split second, Adrian struck with precision, landing a quick punch to the creature's side. The Zokrin staggered back, surprised at how quickly the human had moved. "What the?" Kruk shouted, his eyes widening in disbelief. But Adrian didn't give him the chance to finish. He was already on the move again, his training kicking in. With a swift, powerful movement, Adrian grabbed the Zokrin by the wrist, twisted it sharply, and used the creature's own weight to throw him to the ground. The thug hit the floor hard, his body crashing against the metal surface with a loud thud. The remaining Zokrins froze for a moment, stunned by the sudden change in the dynamic. Adrian wasn't what they had expected. He wasn't trembling in fear or pleading for mercy. Instead, he was standing tall, his posture confident, his eyes hard and unwavering. "You want to try me next?" Adrian asked, his voice still calm, but his tone now carrying the weight of someone who had been in too many battles to count. "Because I'm just getting started." For the briefest moment, the bullies hesitated. They had never been faced with someone who fought back like this. Most beings cowered before them, or at least tried to bargain their way out of trouble. But Adrian wasn't backing down, and his resolve was starting to have an effect on the others. Kruk, still reeling from the surprise, snarled, "Enough of this! Take him down!" With a guttural roar, he lunged forward, his massive fists swinging wildly toward Adrian. But Adrian was already moving, stepping to the side with effortless grace. The punch missed, and Kruk's momentum carried him forward, throwing him off balance. It was exactly the opening Adrian needed. With a swift, controlled movement, Adrian swept Kruk's legs out from under him, sending the hulking alien crashing to the ground. The impact was so hard that the floor beneath them shuddered, and Kruk let out a grunt of pain. He tried to scramble to his feet, but Adrian was already on top of him, pinning his arms to the floor with ease. "You had your chance," Adrian said, his voice low and steady. "Now you'll listen." Kruk struggled beneath him, his strength nearly overwhelming. But Adrian's grip was firm. With a quick shift of his body, he used Kruk's own power against him, twisting his arms into an immobilizing hold. The larger alien snarled, his anger rising to a boil, but Adrian simply tightened his grip, forcing the air from Kruk's lungs. "Enough," Kruk bellowed, his voice filled with fury. "You," Adrian cut him off with a sharp, commanding look. "I'm giving you one last chance to walk away. Leave her alone, walk away, and I won't make you regret this any more than you already will." For a long moment, Kruk simply glared at him, chest heaving with rage. The other Zokrin stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Their leader, the one who was supposed to be the strongest, was now completely at Adrian's mercy. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, Kruk's posture changed. His anger simmered down, replaced by the realization that he had been outmatched. Slowly he nodded, his pride wounded but his survival instinct kicking in. "Fine," he spat, his voice full of venom. "We'll leave her alone, but this isn't over, human." Adrian didn't flinch at the threat. "I'll be waiting," he said simply before releasing Kruk and standing up. He brushed himself off, his expression calm and unyielding. There was no need to say anything else. The Zokrins knew who had won this confrontation. Kruk and his gang didn't linger. The Zokrins were nothing if not prideful, and they weren't about to stay around in front of the crowd to admit defeat. With one last glare at Adrian, they quickly backed away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving behind only their wounded pride. The marketplace, which had been filled with hushed whispers and fearful glances, began to return to normal. The air seemed to lift, as if the tension that had hung over the crowd had finally broken. But for Zira, everything had changed in an instant. She looked up at Adrian, still sitting on the ground, clutching the remains of her broken toy. She hadn't known what to expect when the human had intervened, but now that the bullies were gone, she felt a strange sense of relief, like something deep inside her chest had eased. The terror she had felt moments ago, when Kruk had taken her toy and crushed it without a second thought, was still fresh in her mind. But now she no longer felt so alone. Adrian knelt down beside her, his presence warm and reassuring. He didn't say anything at first, simply sitting quietly with her, giving her time to process what had just happened. Zira was still trembling, but the tears had stopped flowing. She looked up at him, her big eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. "Thank you for saving me." Adrian gave her a soft smile. "No one should have to go through that," he said gently, "and no one should ever treat you like that. I'm glad I could help." Zira clutched the remains of her toy tightly in her hands. It was broken, but it was still hers. And in a strange way, it felt like something more than just a toy now. It was a symbol of the kindness a stranger had shown her when no one else had. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said quietly. Adrian reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "You're stronger than you think," he said, "but you don't have to face everything alone." And in that moment, Zira realized that while the universe was full of dangers, there were also people, like Adrian, who would stand by her no matter what. The marketplace gradually returned to its usual hum of activity. Shouts of traders peddling their wares, the sound of alien tongues mingling in a cacophony of different languages, and the occasional cry of excitement or disappointment filled the air once again. But Zira couldn't focus on any of it. Her mind was still processing what had just happened, the confrontation with the Zokrins, and more importantly, the human who had stepped in to protect her. She looked down at the broken pieces of her toy, now scattered across the ground, its once beautiful crystalline surface chipped and cracked. She had clutched it so tightly that her knuckles were white, but now it seemed so fragile, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The memory of Kruk's mocking laughter still echoed in her mind, the harsh sound of the toy breaking apart, and the sharp pain in her chest as it all happened. But then she thought of Adrian, the human who had stood up for her when no one else had. His calm, controlled movements, the way he had taken down the Zokrins without breaking a sweat, and the way he had refused to back down even when they threatened him. Zira had never met anyone like him before. He was different. There was strength in him, but it was a strength that came from a place of kindness and bravery, not arrogance or cruelty. She could still feel the warmth of his hand on her shoulder. It had been comforting, as if his presence alone was enough to reassure her that everything would be okay. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her with such care, and it left a mark on her heart, one she would never forget. Adrian sat beside her, waiting patiently. He didn't rush her or force her to talk. He understood that moments like this needed time. Zira could sense the quiet understanding in his posture, the way he sat with his arms loosely folded, his expression calm but attentive. He wasn't here to impose on her. He was simply there, offering support in the way only someone who had seen the worst of the galaxy could. The minutes ticked by, and the sounds of the market began to blend together in a distant hum. Finally, Zira spoke. Her voice was small at first, hesitant, but it grew stronger with each word. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a little girl. I don't understand why you do that." Adrian turned to look at her, his gaze soft but unwavering. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one should have to face bullies, no matter who they are or where they come from. You didn't deserve what happened. I wasn't about to let them get away with it." Zira looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had never thought of herself as someone who deserved protection. Her species, though highly intelligent and respected, wasn't known for their physical strength. And Zira. She had always felt small, weak even, compared to the larger, more powerful beings that filled the galaxy. But Adrian hadn't cared about any of that. He had seen her as more than just a fragile alien child. He had seen her as a person, someone worth defending. She looked down at the broken toy again, her hands still clutching the shards. "I don't know how to fix it," she said quietly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's ruined. It's gone." Adrian glanced at the toy, then back at her. He could see the sadness in her eyes, the weight of the loss that was so much more than just a broken object. The toy had been a connection to her past, a reminder of her mother, and losing it felt like losing a part of herself. "I know it's hard," Adrian said gently. "But it's not the end of the world. You can't let one bad thing define you. You're strong, Zira. You're stronger than you think." Zira didn't respond right away. She just stared at the broken toy, her fingers brushing over the shards. It was hard to believe that she was strong. She had been raised to value intelligence, not physical prowess. Her people were brilliant thinkers, great philosophers, and scientists. But when it came to defending herself, she had always felt lacking. "I don't feel strong," she said softly, more to herself than to Adrian. "I feel like I don't belong here, like I'm too small for this big, scary galaxy." Adrian's expression softened as he listened to her words. He had heard similar sentiments from many young soldiers in the past, those who felt overwhelmed by the weight of the universe. But the truth was, strength came in many forms. It wasn't just about how much someone could lift or how well they could fight. Sometimes, strength was about holding on, even when everything seemed to fall apart. It was about standing up, even when the world made you feel small and insignificant. "You belong here, Zira," Adrian said firmly. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't. The galaxy may be big, but that doesn't mean you're too small for it. It just means you have the opportunity to make a bigger impact, to bring something unique to it. You have your own strength, even if you don't see it yet." Zira looked at him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite place. The warmth in his voice, the belief he had in her, it was something she had never felt before. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a purpose in this vast, confusing universe. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Adrian gave her a small, reassuring smile. "None of us are ever really ready. We just take one step at a time." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The weight in her chest didn't feel as heavy as before, but there was still a sense of loss that lingered. Her toy was gone, and she knew there was no way to truly replace the memories attached to it. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to carry that weight alone anymore. "I'm sorry about your toy," Adrian said after a brief silence, "but I know something that might help." Zira looked up at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, no bigger than the palm of his hand. It was a tiny, glowing orb with intricate patterns etched into its surface. "It's a 3D printer," he explained. "It can recreate just about anything. I've got some spare parts that might be able to help fix it. It won't be exactly the same, but it could be a start." Zira's eyes widened in surprise. "You can do that? You can make a new toy?" Adrian smiled. "Well, not exactly new, but close enough. I can print out the pieces and help you put it back together. It's not perfect, but it's something." He activated the device, and the tiny orb hummed to life, sending a soft glow into the surrounding darkness of the market corner. The patterns on its surface shifted, and a tiny, intricate laser beam began to form the missing parts of the toy. Zira watched in awe as the small device worked its magic, replicating the delicate crystalline structure of her toy. It wasn't the same as the original, but it was close enough. The feeling of loss started to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. Adrian handed the completed piece to Zira, who took it carefully in her hands. It was smooth and cool to the touch, and though it wasn't as perfect as the one she had lost, it was hers again. Her heart lightened as she looked at the toy, now whole once more. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with a mix of wonder and gratitude. "It's not the same, but it's still perfect." Adrian smiled warmly, his eyes filled with kindness. "It's a good start," he said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "And no matter what happens, you'll always have the strength to rebuild. Don't forget that." Zira hugged the toy close to her chest, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. The galaxy was big, and sometimes it felt overwhelming. But as long as there were people like Adrian in it, people who cared, who stood up for what was right, maybe she didn't have to face it alone. For the first time, Zira felt like she could be strong. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But someday she would find her place in this universe, and when she did, she would make it a better one. The next few days on Krylon Station felt different to Zira. The marketplace, which had once seemed so overwhelming and chaotic, now felt a little smaller. Everywhere she went, the faces of the aliens around her seemed less intimidating. She still heard the sounds of bustling traders, the languages that twisted her tongue, and the calls of salespeople trying to make their mark, but it all felt a little more manageable. She couldn't shake the memory of what had happened. Kruk and his gang of bullies were gone, their retreat still fresh in her mind. She had never been so close to feeling real fear before, the kind of fear that clung to your chest and wouldn't let go. But it had been Adrian who had stepped in, a human from a distant planet, with no reason to help her other than his own sense of justice. His intervention had changed everything. Zira spent her days now in a quieter part of the station. She still wandered the corridors, her small feet tapping lightly on the metal floors, but now she kept her eyes open for Adrian. She didn't know where he went when he wasn't with her, but she liked the idea of him being nearby. His confidence, his calmness had left a mark on her, a mark that made her feel a little braver. She found herself less scared, more willing to stand tall when people brushed past her or when strange alien voices called out. But even as the days passed, the sight of the toy that Adrian had helped fix still comforted her. It was no longer the beautiful crystal creation from her mother, but it was something new, something better in a way. Adrian had shown her that things didn't always stay perfect, that sometimes things broke and couldn't be fixed the way they once were. But that didn't mean they couldn't be made whole again, just in a different way. As the sun began to set one evening, casting a soft orange glow through the station's large viewing windows, Zira sat by the edge of the marketplace. She wasn't in the middle of the crowd, like she usually was. She had moved off to the side, her legs crossed as she watched the glowing lights of distant planets flicker through the window. The sky outside was dotted with hundreds of ships, some enormous and sleek, others small and humble. She could only imagine where each one came from, where it was going, and who was aboard. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts, soft and steady. Zira looked up to see Adrian approaching, his familiar smile warming his face. Even though he was a human, one of the smaller species in the galaxy, he seemed to hold an air of authority. Maybe it was his experience, maybe it was the way he moved. Whatever it was, Zira could see why others respected him. She felt a bit of pride knowing someone like him had stood up for her. "Mind if I join you?" Adrian asked, his voice gentle but confident. Zira smiled and moved slightly, making room for him on the bench. "I'm not really doing anything, just thinking." Adrian nodded, sitting down beside her. He leaned back against the cool metal, his eyes following hers to the horizon. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, like two people who didn't need words to understand each other. "I've been thinking about what you said," Zira said after a while, her voice thoughtful. "About being strong. I don't know if I understand it yet, but I think I'm starting to. Maybe strength isn't about not being afraid. Maybe it's about what you do with that fear." Adrian turned his head to look at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's exactly it. Fear is natural. Everyone feels it, no matter how strong they are. But what makes a person strong is how they face it. Do they run away or do they stand their ground? You stood your ground when it counted, Zira. That's something a lot of people can't do." Zira looked down at the toy in her lap, the piece that Adrian had helped create. She had spent hours staring at it, holding it in her hands as if it could offer answers. The toy had become more than just a thing. It had become a symbol of something greater. It represented not just her mother's love, but her own journey, one she had only begun to understand. She knew now that the galaxy wasn't as simple as she had once thought. It was filled with dangers, yes, but it was also filled with opportunities to change, to grow, and to become something more than she had ever imagined. "I've been alone for so long," Zira continued, her voice quieter now. "I don't really have anyone except for this toy and you. I don't even know how to fit in with all these people. Everything is so different." Adrian looked at her for a moment, his eyes soft and understanding. "I understand what you mean. It's not easy to find your place in the galaxy. I've been through that myself. The first time I left Earth, I was scared. The galaxy was big and I was just one person. It felt like I would never matter, but I found a way to make a difference. We all do. It takes time, but it happens." Zira looked at him, her gaze full of curiosity. "But how? How did you find your way?" Adrian smiled, his eyes reflecting the distant stars. "I think I found it by helping others. I didn't have to save the whole galaxy, but if I could do something small, something that mattered, then that was enough. You don't have to be the biggest or the strongest to make a difference. You just have to care." Zira was quiet for a moment, her small hands wrapped around the toy. It made sense. She didn't need to be a hero to have an impact. She didn't need to be like the Zokrins, big, loud, and intimidating. She could be small, quiet, and still make a difference. "I guess that's why you helped me," Zira said softly. "You care." Adrian's smile grew a little wider. "I do. Everyone deserves to be cared for. No one should be alone in a place like this." Zira looked out at the stars again, her mind racing with new thoughts. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. There was more to the galaxy than she had ever realized. There were people like Adrian, people who stood up when things got tough, who cared for others even when they didn't have to. Maybe, just maybe, she could be one of those people too. That night, as Zira walked back to the small quarters she had been staying in, she found herself smiling. It wasn't a big, sweeping smile, but it was something. She had a feeling deep inside her chest that her journey wasn't over yet. She had learned so much already, and she knew there was still more to discover. As she passed through the crowded hallways of Krylon Station, she noticed the eyes of the aliens around her. They didn't seem as threatening anymore. She didn't feel as small as she had before. She still had a long way to go, but the seed of confidence had been planted. Adrian had given her something priceless, the knowledge that she could stand tall even when she felt weak, that she didn't have to hide away. She could face whatever came next. When she reached her quarters, she placed the toy on a small shelf by the window, letting it catch the light of the distant stars. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was hers, and that was enough. She sat on the bed for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened. The bullies, the confrontation, Adrian's help. It had all been so much to take in, but somehow it all made sense now. The galaxy wasn't a place where people had to be perfect. It was a place where they could make mistakes, learn from them, and grow. And Zero was going to grow. She stood up and walked over to the window, her eyes fixed on the stars outside. The galaxy was big and it might be scary, but she wasn't alone anymore. There were people out there who cared, people who would help her when she needed it, and people she could help in return. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew she was ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow was a new day, and it was hers to shape. Zero woke early the next morning, her eyes fluttering open to the soft glow of the station's artificial daylight. The room was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the life support systems and the distant chatter of other travelers in the corridors. For a moment, she lay still, her thoughts drifting back to everything that had happened in the past few days. She remembered the fear she had felt when Kruk and his gang of Zokrins had taken her toy, the overwhelming feeling of helplessness. She remembered Adrian, his calm confidence, the way he had stood up for her without hesitation. As she lay there, Zira found herself thinking about what Adrian had said. Strength wasn't just about size or power. It was about how you faced the challenges in front of you. She had faced her fear when she had stood up to the bullies, even if she had been too scared to do anything at the time. Adrian had given her the courage to believe in herself, and in a way, that belief had changed everything. Her fingers gently brushed over the toy that sat on the small shelf beside her bed. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but it didn't need to be. It was a reminder of how things could be fixed, how they could be made whole again, even after they had been broken. It had been a symbol of her mother's love, and now it was a symbol of her own strength. She stood up and stretched, feeling the coolness of the station's air on her skin. It was a new day, and for the first time in a long while, Zira felt like she had the strength to face it. She dressed quickly, pulling on her simple clothes. As she made her way out of the room, she couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose in her step. The station was still bustling, as it always was. Aliens of every shape and size moved through the hallways, going about their business, and the marketplace was already filling up with vendors eager to make their morning sales. But today, Zira wasn't afraid to be there. She wasn't going to hide in the corners anymore. She had a place here, and she was going to take it. As she walked through the crowded marketplace, Zira noticed a few familiar faces. Some of the traders waved at her, and one or two even gave her a friendly nod. They had seen her before, sitting quietly trying to avoid attention. But now, something was different. Zira stood a little taller. She walked with more confidence, not hiding behind her own insecurities. The galaxy was a big place, and there were many challenges to face. But Zira was starting to understand that those challenges didn't have to be faced alone. As she passed by a group of traders, one of them, a tall alien with green skin and bright blue eyes, called out to her. "Hey, little one, you look different today. Something changed?" Zira stopped, turning to face the trader with a smile. "I guess you could say I'm starting to believe in myself." The trader raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "That's the best thing you can do, kid. The galaxy has a way of knocking you down, but the key is getting back up. You've got that look about you now, I can see it." Zira felt a surge of warmth at his words. The encouragement, though simple, meant more than he could know. She had always been afraid of how people might see her, but now she was beginning to realize that it didn't matter. What mattered was how she saw herself. "Thanks," she said, her voice steady and filled with newfound confidence. "I'm learning," the trader chuckled. "Good luck, kid. I've got a feeling you're going to do just fine." Zira smiled and continued on her way. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew she was ready for whatever came next. The sense of fear that had once followed her around was beginning to fade. She didn't have to face the galaxy alone. There were people out there, like Adrian, who cared about what happened to her, and in turn, she could care about them too. As she made her way to the corner of the marketplace where she usually found Adrian, she spotted him standing near a food stall, talking to a group of traders. His easygoing manner and the way the traders laughed with him made Zira smile. He had a way of making people feel comfortable, of making them believe that things could be okay, even when they didn't seem to be. When he saw her approaching, Adrian's face lit up with a warm smile. He waved her over, and Zira walked toward him, feeling the familiar sense of calm that always seemed to settle over her when he was around. "Good morning," Adrian said, his voice light and friendly. "How's the galaxy treating you today?" Zira grinned. "I think I'm starting to figure it out." That's what I like to hear, Adrian replied. Ready to take on the day? I think so, Zira said, her voice full of determination. I've been thinking a lot about what you said about strength. Adrian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh. And what did you decide? Zira looked out at the crowded marketplace, her eyes sweeping across the many faces around her. I decided that strength isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about standing up when it matters. And sometimes that means standing up for yourself even when you're scared. Adrian nodded, clearly pleased with her words. That's the truth, and you've got more strength than you know. Zira smiled, feeling the warmth of his encouragement. It wasn't just his words, though. It was the belief he had in her. It was the way he had helped her when she needed it most, without asking for anything in return. Adrian had shown her that the universe didn't have to be a place filled with fear. It could be a place where people stood together, helping each other through the hard times. I'm ready to do something today, Zira said, her voice steady. Something that matters. Adrian's smile grew wider. That's the spirit. The galaxy needs more people like you. They spent the rest of the day together, walking through the marketplace, meeting new people and sharing stories. Adrian introduced Zira to a few of his old friends, some fellow soldiers, a few traders, and even a few diplomats. Each conversation was a small step for Zira, a way of learning more about the world around her. And with each new interaction, her confidence grew a little more. By the time the sun began to set and the stars started to twinkle in the station's artificial sky, Zira felt a sense of peace settle over her. It was a feeling she hadn't known before, a feeling that, no matter how big the galaxy was, she had a place in it. She was no longer just a small, frightened child hiding in the corners. She was a part of something bigger. She was a part of the galaxy. That night, as she lay in bed, Zira thought about all that had happened. She thought about her mother, about the toy that had once been so perfect and was now broken, but still whole in its own way. She thought about Adrian, who had helped her see that strength came from within. And she thought about herself, about how much she had learned and how much more there was still to discover. The galaxy was big, and sometimes it felt overwhelming. But Zira knew that as long as she had people who cared about her, as long as she remembered the lessons she had learned, she would be okay. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she would find her own way to make a difference in this vast, sprawling universe. The next day, Zira woke up with a sense of purpose. She had no idea what the future would bring, but she was ready to face it. She was no longer just a small alien girl with a broken toy. She was someone who could stand tall, who could face her fears, and who could help others do the same. The galaxy was waiting, and Zira was ready to meet it head-on.